Hello and welcome to the third episode of our Afterlife series on ultimate enlightenment. In our previous episode, we pulled back the heavy theological curtains surrounding the demonic to reveal that a demon is not a literal red monster dwelling in a geographic cavern. Instead, we mapped out a precise, mathematical reality. A demon is any force, organism, or malicious external frequency that actively works to hijack the right hemisphere of your brain and systematically sever your connection to the divine frequency of Ubuntu. We learned that these forces, from your own unredeemed animalistic left hemisphere to physical parasites and electromagnetic mind control weapons, operate entirely through the art of the whisper, manipulating your biological engine to gain your consent. But today, we must track these predators to their primary hunting ground. To fully comprehend how to protect your temple, we must answer the most terrifying question in all of human spiritual history. What is hell? What is the underworld? For centuries, mainstream religious institutions have weaponized the concept of hell, using it as a tool of fear and absolute psychological manipulation. They have painted a picture of a physical subterranean underworld where a vengeful deity casts corrupt souls to be burned by literal brimstone and tortured by horned beasts holding pitchforks. But when we throw away the dogmatic filters and look through the lens of esoteric spiritual physics, a staggering truth emerges. Hell is not a geographical place beneath the dirt. The underworld is the absolute lowest vibrational state of unredeemed human consciousness. It is a psychological and spiritual swamp, the dark, heavy density of a person who has completely defaulted on their 10% spiritual tithe, snuffed out their connection to Ubuntu, and surrendered their biological machinery entirely over to the beast. When you study the ancient scriptures with an awakened eye, you realize that the prophets were constantly trying to describe this state of mental and spiritual entrapment. The Bible uses incredibly vivid, terrifying language to depict this realm, but it was always describing the mechanics of a hijacked mind. Look at the book of Matthew 13:42, which states that the wicked will be cast into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Look at Revelation 21:8, which warns of a lake which burneth with fire and brimstone. To the unenlightened mind, these verses sound like physical execution chambers. But in the language of the mysteries, the eternal fire of hell is the absolute light of truth, tormenting an unaligned soul. Fire is the ultimate elemental force of purification and reality. When a person spends their entire life locked inside the survival-driven illusions of the left hemisphere, chasing material greed, feeding physical parasites, and stepping on their fellow man, their consciousness becomes completely incompatible with the high-frequency truth of the cosmos. When that soul is exposed to the brilliant, unyielding light of the divine, that truth does not comfort them. It burns them. It acts as an agonizing psychological fire because it utterly torches the illusions of their ego. To make matters worse, this eternal fire came from the mouths of the angels, the fire-breathing locusts with breastplates of fire, and some more angels unleashing the heat of the sun, according to the book of Revelation. And the book went on to say that the majority of the people repented not their deeds while they were being tormented by this heat, while the truth hurt them. The only individuals who do not suffer in this fire are the enlightened ones, the initiates who willingly underwent the spiritual physics of transformation while alive. As John the Baptist openly declared in Matthew 3:11, the Messiah would baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire. The enlightened soul has already burned away their animalistic lower nature through meditation, self-discipline, and absolute submission to reality. Because they are already pure gold, the fire of truth does not torment them, it elevates them. But to the resident of the underworld, the truth is an eternal tormentor. The biblical stories of Daniel and the 3 Hebrew boys perfectly illustrate how the enlightened soul transcends worldly suffering and tames the lower animalistic nature. In the book of Daniel, chapter 3, King Nebuchadnezzar demands absolute submission to a golden idol, but 3 Hebrew initiates, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refuse, declaring their sole allegiance to the ultimate reality of God. Angered, the king orders them thrown into a furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. Yet as Daniel 3:24-25 records, the king was astonished to see 4 men loose, walking safely in the midst of the fire, with the 4th looking like the Son of God. Spiritually, this furnace represents the fire of truth, because these 3 individuals had already burned away their lower egos through discipline and faith. They were like pure gold, leaving the fire with nothing to consume but the ropes that bound them. The appearance of the 4th figure symbolizes the awakened higher self, or the Christ consciousness, proving that the fire of truth does not torment the pure. It only destroys their limitations and elevates them. This mastery over the physical and spiritual elements is further mirrored in Daniel's own trial in the lion's den, recorded in Daniel chapter 6. Thrown into a pit of starved, ferocious lions for refusing to halt his daily practice of prayer and meditation, Daniel emerges the next morning completely unscathed, declaring in Daniel 6:22 that God sent an angel to shut the lions' mouths. In esoteric traditions, the lion represents the raw, untamed ego, encompassing pride, aggression, and wild animalistic desires. Daniel did not fight these beasts with physical weapons, but rather tamed them through his absolute alignment with the divine. By entering into deep meditation and submission to reality, the enlightened soul quietens the roaring passions of the lower human nature. Just as the furnace proves that the pure soul is immune to the tormenting fires of truth, the lion's den demonstrates that the beasts of the underworld become entirely docile in the presence of a fully realized initiate. What about the nagging demons of the Sunken Place? This low-frequency swamp of consciousness is the absolute best, most perfect dwelling place for the full spectrum of demons we exposed in our last episode. When you drop your vibration into the underworld state, you are stepping directly into their territory. The classic cartoon imagery of a demon standing over a soul, constantly poking and prodding them with a pitchfork, is a literal allegorical representation of what happens to a compromised human mind. Those pitchforks are the endless, nagging thoughts, irrational anxieties, savage cravings, and toxic internal whispers that these predatory forces plant into your head. In the underworld, you are completely defenseless. Because you have diminished the Ubuntu side of your brain, you have no spiritual shield. You are trapped in what can only be described as a sunken place, a dense, heavy gravity of awareness that the vast majority of humanity is absolutely terrified to rise from. Why do people stay trapped in this misery? Because they are being systematically bullied, suppressed, and paralyzed by these internal voices. The demons whisper that they are worthless, that survival requires ruthlessness, and that there is no hope beyond the material matrix. The nagging is so relentless, and the sensory noise of this low-vibrational state is so incredibly loud, that the soul becomes completely paralyzed, choosing the familiar torment of the swamp over the daunting climb toward the light. The escape protocol, finding the cave. For generations, mainstream religious institutions have sold a cheap, highly distorted version of salvation to the masses. They have convinced millions of people that escaping the heavy clutches of hell and the underworld is as simple as reciting a single emotional confession with your mouth. They tell you that if you just accept a historical figure into your heart or repeat a scripted prayer, you are instantly saved, your sins are wiped away, and your passport to heaven is permanently stamped. But this is an absolute theological illusion that defies the literal laws of spiritual physics. One verbal confession will never stop the relentless whispers of the demons we just exposed. It will not balance your unredeemed left hemisphere. It will not purge the biological parasites hijacking your gut, and it will not shield your brainwaves from advanced frequency weapons. If salvation were merely a matter of words, the world would not be filled with miserable, anxious, and deeply compromised religious people who are still completely possessed by their lower animal natures. We must look past the sanitized, dogmatic filters and look directly at what the master teacher actually said. In the scriptures, Jesus did not say, "Recite a prayer about me and do whatever you want." He explicitly declared, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." To say he is the way means he left a precise, structural blueprint, a path of intense transformation that you must physically walk. One confession cannot save you. You must walk in his exact footsteps and systematically climb the spiritual ladder of consciousness. As we meticulously outlined in our What is Enlightenment series, this ladder is the exact, sequential activation of the 7 spirits of God, which correspond perfectly to the ancient Eastern chakra system. True salvation is not a legal loophole. It is a rigorous, evolutionary ascent through the elemental layers of reality. To initiate this authentic escape protocol, you cannot jump straight into the clouds. As we established, you must first transition from the chaotic chaos of the underworld to the solid ground of the earth element. This is the first milestone of the spiritual ascent, and the only way to anchor yourself at the center of this dimension is to execute the ancient technology of the cave. Throughout human history, every great prophet, master, and innovator who needed to conquer the lower forces began their journey by entering a space of radical isolation and sensory deprivation. Moses climbed the lonely heights of Sinai, Elijah hid in a desolate cavern on Mount Horeb, and Muhammad retreated to the pitch darkness of the cave of Hira. As we pointed it out in our first episode, you need to hide from the zombie virus being spread by the masses. As we broke down in that series, you do not need a physical cavern in the mountains to execute this process today. The cave is simply the universal mechanic of deep, absolute meditation. When you close your physical eyes, disconnect from the frantic distractions of the marketplace, and deliberately anchor your awareness inward, you are entering your inner cave. However, we must expand our understanding of this spiritual technology, because classical silent meditation is not the only way to construct this inner sanctuary. If you look at ancient, traditional liturgical practices, such as the chanting of traditional hymns and Gregorian chants found within the Catholic Church, Orthodox cathedrals, and ancient monasteries, you will find the exact same universal mechanics of the mind at work. Singing these incredibly slow, rhythmic, and resonant hymns is a profound, hidden form of active meditation. The sustained, deep vocalizations and repetitive melodic intervals do not require analytical left brain processing. Instead, they bypass your critical intellect entirely. The acoustic frequencies of these slow hymns physically vibrate your nervous system, down-regulating your stress responses, grounding your root chakra, and effortlessly calming the internal beast. Contrast this sacred, grounding acoustic technology with the bizarre, chaotic phenomena unfolding in many modern megachurches today. In a desperate bid to remain relevant and entertain the masses, these institutions have stripped away the slow, meditative hymns and replaced them with high-octane rock concerts, driving pop rhythms, and what essentially amounts to Christianized heavy metal music. This hyper-stimulated, high-energy music does not create a cave of isolation or sensory peace within the temple of your body. It does the exact opposite. It aggressively pumps adrenaline into your bloodstream, spikes your heart rate, and forces your brainwaves into frantic, survival-driven high-beta states, the precise frequency of stress, logistics, and material chaos. Far from silencing the inner demons, these heavy, chaotic frequencies act as a massive smoke screen for them. The booming sensory noise of modern church concerts throws the mind into a collective emotional hysteria, completely drowning out the still small voice of universal intelligence. It tricks the analytical ego into believing it is experiencing a mystical breakthrough, when in reality, it is merely trapped inside a biological dopamine loop, completely cut off from the deep, heavy silence required to ground the earth element. The primary objective of the cave, whether achieved through deep silent meditation or the slow, rhythmic cadence of a sacred hymn, is to systematically starve the demons of your attention. By slowing your brainwaves down from the stress-induced, chaotic high-beta frequencies of the daily grind and shifting them into the peaceful, coherent states of alpha and theta, you turn down the volume on the lower self. In that profound, self-imposed stillness, the demonic whispers lose their grip. You create a sacred, silent vacuum within your mind, holding the line and taming the beast until your foundation is perfectly secure. But the cave is only the beginning of the structural physics of salvation. Once you stabilize the earth element, you must migrate into the fluid cleansing of the water element, mastering your emotional body. Ultimate salvation, the definitive breakdown of the demonic matrix, finally happens when your consciousness ascends to unlock the fire element. Fire is the elemental frequency of absolute purification, transmutation, and divine testing. This is when you are born again and have found eternal life and have cured yourself from the zombie virus. This is precisely why, before launching his cosmic mission, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the brutal, hyper-isolated desert to fast for 40 days and 40 nights. The desert was his ultimate fire crucible. He did not go there to hide. He went there to draw out his inner demons, the latent, survival-driven impulses of the primal hominid left brain, and burn them away in the unyielding fire of his divine consciousness. In that intense state of physical depletion, when the biological animal was screaming for food, comfort, and survival, the devil, the personification of the lower self and the predatory frequencies of the matrix, came to whisper directly into his mind. The demon whispered to his primal appetites, telling him to turn stones into bread. It whispered to his ego, telling him to throw himself from the pinnacle of the temple to prove his specialness. It whispered to his left brain material ambition, offering him all the kingdoms of the world if he would just surrender his divine alignment. But Jesus did not engage in cheap verbal compromises. He stood immovable in the fire of his higher right brain awareness, using the absolute law of the divine to completely torch every single whisper of the beast. By the end of those 40 days, the animal engine was completely broken, tamed, and made perfectly subservient to the divine architect within. The lower 3 chakras were entirely conquered by the fire of truth. That is the exact spiritual ladder we must climb. True salvation is a biological and spiritual warfare that requires you to go into the cave, face the beast, and pass through the fire until only the uncreated light of the gods remains. This structural conquest of the animal architecture is the exact hidden meaning behind the ancient Greek myth of Hercules. Hercules was not merely a physical warrior battling literal monsters in an ancient fairy tale. He represents the human soul striving to break free from the heavy gravity of the material matrix. Before he could ever earn his rightful seat in the council of the gods on Mount Olympus, he was forced to systematically complete the 12 labors. Every single one of those 12 legendary labors was an esoteric allegory for taming a specific, wild biological beast within human nature, from choking out the ferocious Nemean lion of the raw ego to capturing the elusive, multi-headed hydra of unchecked mental cravings. Hercules had to prove that his divine inheritance could completely master his savage terrestrial biology before the cosmic creators would welcome him into their higher assembly. To replicate this heroic feat, and successfully hold your ground inside the darkness of the inner cave, you must actively draw upon the third vital energy center of your temple, the spirit of might. This specific spirit governs your solar plexus, the third chakra engine of raw will, internal power, and unyielding psychological stamina. The spirit of might is the essential weapon you must wield to fight the full spectrum of these whispering demons. It takes monumental, ironclad inner strength to look directly at your cravings, your survival-driven anxieties, and the relentless external radio manipulation, and firmly tell them no. Without activating the spirit of might, the gravity of the underworld swamp will simply pull you back down into the dirt. You must intentionally cultivate this inner force, anchoring your earthly foundation until the lower animal engine is entirely submissive to the light. Thank you for watching this third episode of the Afterlife series on Ultimate Enlightenment. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on all your notifications. In our next explosive episode, we are going to climb past the elemental trials of the earth and the fire crucibles of the desert to whisper to you about the ultimate reality of the kingdom of heaven. We will show you how this celestial kingdom is not a destination in the clouds, but a multidimensional frequency that is systematically unlocked through the activation of your sixth chakra, the sixth spirit of God, the third eye of cosmic sight. Until then, hold your cave, summon your spirit of might, and master the beast. Stay sovereign, stay conscious, and remember that you are the living temple. See you in the next episode.